the Licensing and Regulatory Committee on June the 15th. First of all, terms of reference. I don't know if you've noticed, Heather spotted this earlier before. Terms of reference, there are 15 members on the committee, but unfortunately there are only 14, as you notice in the boxes: Conservative, Labour, Independent, Liberals, Green and non-aligned. There seemingly is no non-aligned, so they must have been asked if they wish to participate and haven't as yet. But do you all agree the terms of reference as they are, with presumably another party? Yeah? Okay, thank you. Right, apologies for absence, please, Heather. That's it.
Sorry. Councillors Hardy, Parry, Sharp and Swinbank.
Thank you. Any from the floor? I presume not. None. Thanks. The minutes of the last meeting. Do you agree with those minutes? On pages 1 to 7, and the second meeting 1 to 11. Agreed? Thank you. I'll sign those later. That includes the subcommittee minutes as well. Disclosures of members' interest? No one's interested, thanks. Right, we now go on to the report from Phil regarding the taxi tariffs.
Thank you, and welcome everyone this afternoon. First thing I'll do, and I know Heather has sent an email out, is again just to note the fact that in the report itself, bullet point or item 14 was incomplete, and I apologise for that because I would have drafted that part of the report. But I believe that Heather has actually sent out an amendment to that to complete that section within the report. In terms of the report that's presented before you, the background to this, as you're all aware, is the previous committee meeting we had where we looked at and considered the tariffs, and there was an agreement reached by the committee that we would impose a tariff increase of 5%. In accordance with the request of the committee, consultation was then undertaken with the trade. And what I would like to stress is that the requirements of the Act, in terms of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act, is that we place an advert in a local newspaper, and that would meet the statutory requirements for consultation. What we elected to do, and again it's set out within the report, is we actually did that, and we also notified the Hackney Carriage trade, i.e. those that would apply the tariff, of the decision of committee and the consultation. So if you like, we met our statutory requirements and we went over and above that, and then invited on an individual basis the trade to comment. And I think that's worthy of note in terms of how the consultation then went. So we endeavoured to undertake a full consultation exercise, and as you will have seen from your report, the actual response to the consultation was very limited. I think 5 representations were received. We are going to circulate some additional information, which I'll talk to in a minute, which will give you further information to consider this afternoon. But we have received some additional consultations after the event, i.e. after the closure of the consultation process. And I know members of the committee received an email direct from Berwick Taxier Association as well. So what we have decided to do is to include those within the information that we're going to share with you in a minute and not exclude them, because I think at the end of the day, it's a matter for the trade to comment. It's disappointing that they didn't comment within the consultation period. It's disappointing that we met with some of them and consultations were still not forthcoming. But I think it would be wrong of us just to say, well, I'm sorry you missed the date, we're going to ignore them going forward. But I still think when you look at it, we are only talking about 8 consultation responses from approximately, well, about 1,000 individuals. So it is a very, very low consultation response. In terms of the legislation basically triggers the meeting we're at today. So as we talked about at the last meeting, you agreed a tariff, we publicised that tariff, and then we waited. If nobody had come back and made representations about that tariff would then would have been implemented on the date we set. That's how the legislation is drafted. The very fact that one person made a representation or commented then requires the council to revisit the matter and then make decisions. So that's the stage we're at now. So in part, what you have to consider is, do you believe that the number, quality, content of the representations is enough for you actually to modify your position? And if you do not, then you can still proceed with your original recommendation, and I will return to those at the end. If, however, you feel that the representations, whether it is one or all of them saying the same thing, are such that you should review or modify your position, that's your decision this afternoon. And I think clearly one of the things that has happened, even in a relatively short period of time since the last committee, is we have seen, obviously, I think, greater impact from the cost of living crisis, and I think more notably, we have seen a significant increase in fuel costs as well. So it may well be that had we run this consultation as of today, we might have got a different response, we might have got more responses. But as it stands at the moment, consultations were limited, but we have sought to include all that we've received basically up until today in the process. I think when it comes to the taxi trade in Northumberland, and this is just a general observation stroke comment, we've previously made reference to the fact that we don't have a single trade body or association which represents Northumberland as a whole. Would we like to see such a thing? Yes, that would be very good. That would be useful to us. But many of the representations we've received have either come from single organisations or organisations which may have a geographic base and may well have members from other parts of Northumberland as part of that association. But what I don't think we've got in terms of the representations themselves as they stand is one single homogenous representation which represents the views of all in Northumberland. It is either individuals or collectives, but what we haven't got, as I say, is that one single representation which says from a, let's say, a properly lawfully constituted body, this is what we want. And I think this makes it challenging, but I think that's the same for any consultation exercise. Whenever you put something out for consultation, you will get different views. You're always going to get some variance. So undoubtedly, what you will see is different opinions, different views. So again, it is a matter for you to decide what weight you want to give to those representations and how you want to present that if you wish to modify the actual tariff itself. In terms of, I suppose, the legal position, just to go back to that, you will set the tariff this afternoon. The tariff itself will be the maximum that can be charged for journeys within that particular zone. So in part you may think, well, that's a good backstop to have, so we can give whatever increase we want, and then the trade will self-manage, because quite clearly, taxis probably have always been a luxury, but are probably even more so of a luxury now. And if the trade were to act, if the trade were to be given, let's say, a significant increase in tariff, which they were then expected to self-manage, and that's what they applied, they would probably put themselves out of business, if I'm being totally honest. So there has to be some self-control, as it were, within the trade. But as a caveat to that, what I would also say is that when tariffs are set, because it's the maximum, the trade will apply it how they think appropriate. And again, there is no qualms from the licensing authority, no qualms from Northumberland County Council how that happens, because what you will see is, I think more so probably within the daytime tariff of Tariff 1, they will probably try and keep the fares lower for their regular customers, etc., etc. And what you may see is the higher tariffs being applied at Tariff 2 when it's in the late night economy. I think one thing to think about and just bear in mind, you know, as a potential risk from setting too high a tariff, is that too high a tariff may well be used through the daytime on a selective basis with the actual tourist industry, because that is their mode of transport, and it may well actually be detrimental to the tourist industry as well. So all we can do is say, there's the information, they are the tariffs that are available to us, what do you think is reasonable as a tariff to go forward. It's a bit like an exam today, because we have got some additional paperwork which we're going to circulate. Tasman's going to talk you through that and explain what we've tried to do and how we've tried to approach it. But it's like a true exam. We thought, if we put it on your desk now, you'll be flicking through it and you'll be trying to understand. It was better to do it in a managed process. What I will say, though, when you look at it, there are differences, but there are some consistencies there. Most of the I think all of the representations we have received are probably all advocating for an increase in the flag fall. So the flag fall, and again I've referenced this in the report, the flag fall is that starting point when you get into a taxi for your minimum journey. So if you get into a taxi, and in our particular case, it's £2.50 for the first 500 yards, that's the flag fall. But what they've all said is they would like that to be increased. So the first journey, or the shortest distance would go up. They've all said that, and that's what we advocated within our initial proposed increase in tariffs. There are various ways in which you can increase the tariff. We have historically opted for one which is based around yardage. So in simple terms, we've kept the unit of increase the same. So whether that be 10 pence or 20 pence, we've kept the unit the same. And the way we've increased the tariff is then to reduce the yardage. So currently, we have a yardage of 91 yards. So every time you travel 91 yards, it goes up 10 pence. So our approach to actually increasing the tariffs is to say, well, we'll leave it as a 10 pence unit, but it'll then be 86 yards you will travel before you then click over 10 pence. And that's the standard way of doing it, because it keeps it as whole numbers, as it were, at the end. So again, what you'll see is people have approached that in slightly different ways. There is possibly, and I'll just say possibly, a danger that we run out of yards, because the further and further you go down, the less yards you've got. And obviously, if you use taxis, and I do use taxis, what's really worrying is if you're on a journey and you're sitting in your car and you're driving, and it appears to be the longer the journey, the quicker the yardage clicks over. So it's going 10 pence, 10 pence, 10 pence. But joking aside, to say, the yardages will get smaller and the click over rate will get longer. So there has been suggestions in there, and they are not without merit, that actually what you do is you double the unit. So instead of having a 10 pence unit, it goes to a 20 pence unit and you double the yardage. That is a way of getting around that sort of ever diminishing number of yards you've got, as it were. I think, again, when you look at it, what you will see, building this up to a big reveal when Tasman's going to go around, I'll pass them out, Tasman. What you will see is that across the board, what was originally proposed as the tariff is probably, when you look at all of the other suggestions, the lowest. It's the lowest rate. And probably there's one in there which is the highest. So really it comes down to yourselves, as I say, when the chair opens this for discussion, debate, to make that decision. In terms of the report itself, if I could just draw your attention to page 13 in the recommendations. You will see on that page 3 bullet points. If you assume top bullet point is 1, second bullet point is 2, and the third one is 3. Your first decision, arguably, is whether or not you want to implement the table of fares as proposed without modification. That is within your gift to do that, so you make no change. What you would also then seek to do is then apply recommendation 3. So you basically say, we're not going to make a modification, and we're going to tell you what date that's going to come into effect. If, however, you decide you are not going to opt for recommendation 1, and you then look at recommendation 2, i.e. to modify the proposed table of fares, you would both modify the table of fares, but you would still also do recommendation 3, agree when that is going to come into effect. In terms of further consultation, the legislation does not require any further consultation beyond this point in time. And I think in terms of timing, it would be very difficult to do anything meaningful, because again, what the legislation said was from the original date, you have to bring the tariff in within 2 months. So your decision today and how that is published will require the tariff to come in no later than the 6th of July. And again, this has always been one of my dilemmas with consultation. Having done consultation, received it and made a decision, do you then consult again? Because the people might have been happy with what you did the first time, unhappy with the second time, and you could go on and on every time you consult. So the position for this would be, after today's decision, and you have set a date, we as officers will then inform the trade of that decision and the date upon which the tariff will come into effect. In practical terms, what that means for the trade is they would then have to make arrangements with the various garages who calibrate their meters, because all the meters are calibrated and certified. They would then have to make an appointment with the garage to have their meter calibrated to reflect the new tariff arrangements before they could apply it. So that's the practical way this will come forward. I will pause at that point and I'll take them round. I'll distribute these. Just give me 30 seconds and then Tasman will talk you through what this actually represents and what we've tried to do.
Before we do that, are there any questions to Phil regarding the report? None? I've got one, Phil, actually. The correspondence you got from the taxi drivers, were there any from any of the large taxi driver firms, such as Phoenix Taxis or something like that, or were they all individual drivers?
To the best of our knowledge, I think the nearest you would say to a larger organisation was Berwick Taxi Association, which came in via email, and all members received a copy of that. We haven't received anything which is overtly linked to one of the larger operators.
But Berwick Taxi Drivers Association aren't really as yet aren't really recognised. We don't know how many drivers are in that or where they're from or anything, do we?
My understanding, obviously, Berwick Taxi Association by name has an affiliation or an association with Berwick. We have asked the question in terms of what is, not about individual members, but what is its total membership, who does it represent? And I say our belief is there are people who are aligned with Berwick Taxi Association who are probably based in the west of the county and the southeast of the county. So you could argue the name's a bit of a misnomer if it says Berwick. But there are those which are aligned with it. But what we have never had confirmation of or assurance that as a body it has a mandate to speak on behalf of all of the trade in Northumberland.
Thanks, that was just for information. Thank you.
Chair.
Councillor Sesford?
Yeah, I know I wasn't at the... have I got to stand up, baby? I wasn't at the last meeting, Chair. So I just wanted a little bit of clarification. You agreed to a 5% increase. I presume you didn't actually work the prices out there and then, and somebody else has done the prices, and it's obviously to the 10 pence rather than the actual 5%, which makes common sense. Who wants to, when you've had a few pints, look at a bill that says something in 38 pence, you know? It's always going to be, and so I can understand that. But that's what I want clarification of. No, but the actual prices worked out the last meeting. It was just to agree to 5%. Is that correct? Yes. Right, because that'll help us when I speak later on.
Thank you. Right, Tasman?
Chair, could I ask a question before you start? I do apologise. Just to get it out of the way.
I'm going to stand as well.
It's going through my head. Members may or may not be aware a lot of the taxi private hire trade exists through doing what you call school runs, special educational needs. And they set a fare, they set a tariff, they get an agreed price. And from my experience, never at the tariff, always well below. In fact, it tends to go to the lowest tender. Not always, but tends to. My question is, I can't recall, but there is a procedure where you can apply for an increase, although you may have that contract for 2-3 years even. There is an annual increase allowed, but you have to request it. Can you give the members a little bit more information on that? Because what's going through my head, I'll explain. It's all right us setting this, but if somebody's main income is at a rate set 2 years ago, we are not helping that person or that company. Thank you.
The answer is probably quite simple. It's not something that we deal with within this process. So you're absolutely right. The people who deliver most of the school contract work and are contracted through local services and Mark Cusack's team will be licensed vehicles, licensed operators, but they are broadly speaking two separate systems. So we will deal with this. And I suppose it's no different to members of staff at Northumberland County Council who will claim a mileage rate, basically saying to their employer, cost of living's gone up, fuel's gone up, are you going to give me an increase in my mileage rate? It would be a matter for the independent operators to ask that question of local or whoever governs it, or for the county council to say, well, because of the pressures that are being experienced, we need to review, the impact of this. But it's not something we influence, and it's not a matter for today.
Thanks very much. I do tend to think, and it's not for now, there should be a bit more joint thinking, because during the pandemic, for example, a 4-seater car or 4 users in that car would no longer carry 4 users in that car. So the loss, because of the increase in living costs, would be greater on that individual. Thank you.
Thank you. Before you, I hope you've got your glasses on. I apologise for the scale of the table in front of you. I tried to get it on one page. The first page, you'll notice, has a number of tariffs on there. What I've tried to do is take the representations and create what the tariff would look like in relation to that, because you'll notice some of the representations say things like increase it by 20%. What does that actually look like in a tariff form? On the second page, you'll see that we've tried to work it out for each of those tariffs for what that would work out at. This is not meant to be for you to determine which one is your favourite, but just to show, depending on how you change the tariff, as to how that affects the actual fares that would be charged. Within the first sheet, you'll see we have the current tariff, or proposed, the one the notice went out for, and then 5 of the representations, the last lot of the Berwick Taxi Association within your pack, and then the 2 additional tariffs we were provided with. Do apologise, it seems to be my workings out for the additional one on the second page has disappeared for the tariff 4, 5 and 6. That's not intentional. I think delete me have come in there. As you'll see, depending on how you deal with the increments of the tariff is to the rate at which the difference between the 2 tariffs changes. You're all looking studiously at it. Thinking, why is she giving me this? But as you say, they are all greater than our tariff. You'll also notice that there is on the front sheet just the representations 3 and 5 have just stated we need to look at the tariffs in relation to those vehicles that are more than 4 passengers. Currently, you get, I think it is currently, just work my way along it, 20p extra for a journey for if you've got more than 4 people in your car. They've asked us whether that you want them to, they've asked for you to consider whether that needs to be changed, and that's specific requests in relation to that. As Phil mentioned, they have all increased by varying amounts the flag fall. I think one has asked for an extra, to what we proposed, an extra 20p. One has asked for an extra 60p. That's within your remit to determine. Does anybody have any questions in relation to this horrible table I've provided you with?
Phil?
Just to come in as well, just on the back of what Tasman has said. So if you're looking at that page 2, as Tasman's correctly highlighted. Proposed is the lowest increase, that was what we proposed. Rep 4, I think, consistently is higher than any of the other proposals that have come through. I think the other thing to note, and this may influence how people have viewed this and commented, if you are a taxi driver who is basically doing work in an urban area, you will probably do more journeys and more frequent journeys. So you then benefit from that flag fall increase, because every journey you will do, you'll get that flag fall. So if you are in a rural area, so you're potentially doing fewer journeys but longer, is it where you only get the flag fall benefit once? So again, I think there needs to be a balance struck between whether it's flag fall and increase to actually get, I think, something which works for all of our trade. Because I think a lot of them, as Tasman said, there was probably a greater focus on just increasing the flag fall, but clearly that would potentially benefit one part of the trade more than another. That's purely and simply because that's how they operate and that's how they work.
Thanks for that, Phil. Any questions? Councillor Sesford?
Well, it's just a minor point what Phil's just said there. Yeah, you only get one flag fall, but if the yardage is lower, then you will get an extra money that way. A longer journey is what I mean. So you do benefit.
Yes, that's absolutely right. But sorry, what I meant was, for some people, the emphasis on increasing the tariff has been by front loading the tariff and having less on the yardage. And as I say, that would work if you're doing lots of frequent journeys, but it would be less beneficial to those doing fewer and longer journeys.
Anyone else?
Sorry, if I can just ask a question. Obviously, what was advertised, it's got, your tariffs and it's got waiting time. That's not included in that table. Is that just as per advertised? Nobody's made any representations about waiting time or anything?
Anyone else? Councillor Gallagher.
Thank you, Chair. Just coming back to the presentation that you said about taxis and being a luxury. I think they're not becoming a luxury now, they're becoming a standard service for a lot of people, where they've lost their bus services, where people can't afford to use cars. I'm really concerned about the consultation as well, with the numbers being so low. That have we got the feel of the industry, or are we kind of guessing what the industry wants? So the reality is that the consultation's been poor. The response has been very professional by the staff. But the thing is, you also mentioned that times are changing, and they're changing very, very quickly in respect of cost of living, in respect of the fuel. So the thing is, are we kind of second guessing what is going to happen? Because will taxis increase again? Because it was touched on before that it wouldn't be worth a while to run a service. And we'll see that with buses now, where bus companies are coming to local authorities UK-wide, where they're just saying, look, this route we can't afford to do, we're out of pocket to do it. So I think we've got to be very mindful of picking the right tariff and being very supportive. And I'm not sure if I kind of tying myself into this. So is there any way of being a little bit flexible on what we're trying to achieve now? Thank you, Chair.
I think we're stuck between a rock and a hard place with this one. No matter what we do, it's going to be wrong for somebody. Taxis, I think, are a luxury, to be honest with you. We'll go to the consultation first. It was done properly. They were consulted properly for the proper length of time. Very few responded. And then Berwick decided that they hadn't, no response at all. So there was a meeting between Phil and some of the Berwick drivers in Tasman. They talked it over. I wasn't there, I wasn't privy. They talked it over. They still didn't consult till after the consultation period ended. It was actually, I think, extended a fortnight, was it, for them?
Just to clarify, I wasn't at that meeting. It was Darren. It was Darren. Sorry, Chair.
My apologies.
But yes, I mean, we did. I think in terms of the consultation, as I say, it's quite clear from a statutory perspective what you should do. We have gone over and above that. And like yourself, Councillor Gallagher, I am disappointed at the level of response, because if you go back to the consultation exercises we did more recently on other aspects of tax license, we got quite a good return in some areas. And I think that's what makes this difficult. If we'd had a higher return rate, and that higher return rate said, we are more than happy with what you're proposing, or we don't want this, we want that, we would have much more clarity. Whereas really what we've got is a very, very, very low response rate with no, well, I'm saying no uniform or consistency, uniformity around the flag itself. But there is also a risk of interpretation that actually the trade are happy with what was proposed, and we just, well, not we, the council elects to move forward on the original proposal. It's a curate's egg, as I say. We try to, well, we do engage, we do consult, but we can't. It's the classic of you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Any more comments, questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, Chair, for me, it's a very simple question, but I'd like to make a comment as well. If and when, and I think we have to do it today, we must do it today, and I emphasise that, if we make a decision, when can we question that decision again? But my comment is this, Chair. When I first got on the local authority, way back when I had long hair and very slim, in 1991, they'd just done a massive consultation on pedestrianisation in Ashington, which was called environment enhancement. It wasn't called pedestrianisation. And the response was pathetic. So, because there wasn't criticism against the environment enhancement, it was logical to assume people were happy with what was being suggested. So what I'm saying is, I think there is a massive need for taxis, otherwise there wouldn't be nearly 1,000 people prepared to pay as much as they do to carry a licence. That's the first thing. I think a response from a handful of people could indicate that the majority are happy with the decision that this group took a couple of months ago after examining all the information. However, a couple of months ago, the Chancellor of the Exchequer didn't think there was any need to make any alterations to what he was suggesting and make increases in his spring budget. This week, he's decided families need an additional £1,200. Now, that's a fact, that's not fiction. And that's because things have changed so dramatically in the same period of time as when we determined a 5% increase. We have to bear that in mind, Chair. That's my comment. I think overall, the officer with years of experience is making a good recommendation. The flagfold to appease the short journey, a small increase on the yardage to appease the longer journey. But the reality is, because we've all done it, when you ask for a taxi, you say, how much will it be? And if the guy turned round at the front of the queue, and tell me where there's a taxi rank nowadays where you walk to, most people use the telephone. You walk to the front of the queue and you say, how much will it be from Morth to Britishvolt? And if he turned around and said, it'll be on the meter when we get there, you would go to the next taxi. Because you want to have an idea. And if he says it's normally 15 quid, but I'll take you for 12, you get in. Because that's the reality of the situation. That's why I mentioned the school runs before. If you want the work, you have to make the deal. We set the maximum they can charge. The minimum isn't really up for discussion, Chair. But we have to be mindful of what that maximum is, because as Mr Soderquist says, the last thing they want to do is price themselves out of the market. That's the last thing they want to do. The competition themselves, they'll determine the need. It's not so much a nighttime activity now. Yesterday, my son, I'm in lodgings, ordered 3 McDonald's, 3 and got them delivered by taxi. That's the reality of what happens today. That's what's happening. And he didn't ask how much it would be. He wanted three McDonald's and he got them delivered. And that is happening daily throughout this county and throughout this country. And we need to understand that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Tasman?
You asked a question in relation to when we could review it. The legislation doesn't limit us to when we can review it again, so you could set a time frame. But I would ask you to bear in mind that that comes with public notices and consultation, etc.
Yeah, just going back to your comment there, the licensing committee that we had on 9th of March, we actually was resolved that this will be reviewed within a year. So that's in the minutes, okay? So that was agreed.
Thank you, that's appreciated.
And Councillor Sessford?
I can make comments, can I? Doesn't have to be a question, does it? Okay. I wasn't at the last meeting, as I've said already, but I have total faith in the people that were here. We had come to a decision for the right reasons at that particular time. And they said 5%, and then someone's gone away and worked out all the figures to the nearest 10 pence. And I, you know, being a silly little geek of numbers, none of these are actually 5%. 6.9, 6.4, 7.4, 6.25 and 6.4%. Apart from the first one, which is only 4%, so whether you could have went from 250 to 270 instead of 260, maybe you could, I don't know. There's a danger of making too many tweaks all the time, though. I mean, I fully understand, by the way, that the price of petrol, because I have to travel from Hexham, so I know exactly what the price of petrol is. And it seems to go up every time I've turned the wheel. However, you know, 2.5 years ago, the price fell out the market, and you were getting petrol for 90p a gallon, and they couldn't give it away. They couldn't even store it. There wasn't enough storage facilities for it. So that's what happened then. Wish that we could find out in a month's time that's going to happen again, but I very much suspect not. So the fact that it is reviewed in a year's time, or is it a year from March or a year from when it's set? A year from when it's set. Okay, so if there turned out to be a bigger fuel crisis than there is already, it could be something that we could call for a review of and things like that, which I think is not a bad option. But I think the decision was made genuinely. I think to tweak all the time is asking for a little bit of bother, but having the safety net, if you like, of a possibility of another one if there's a massive increase unexpectedly, I think is fine. I'm sure if there's a massive decrease, we won't decrease the fares, so, you know.
Thank you.
Gallagher. Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one to Tasman. If in a year's time we went through the process of reviewing what we're going to decide today, how long would that reviewing process normally take?
About the same as what this review process time has taken. However, what we would generally do is we would notify them now that at a particular point we would be reviewing. If they wanted us to, they could put their representations in. We could then bring it to committee, do the public notice, and be back here again. So it would be slightly shorter, but we'd still have to do the formal public notice if we wanted to review it.
Chair, just to come back on that, the reason why I asked that question was if in a year's time we review it and it takes 6 months to get to where we are now again, that's an 18-month span. So as you say, the process can be picked up before the year's end comes out.
Bill?
So in practical terms, what we did this year, which caused some degree of discussion, is we actually sort of did an informal consultation to begin with. And there was a lot of criticism about that, about how much time we gave people. But in truth, what we were trying to do was, I suppose, take a temperature check of the trade to try and understand what their position was. But as Tasman says, if you follow strictly what the legislation says, the council could say to myself, bring a report forward for an increase of the taxi tariff, which obviously is already documented in the minutes of the March committee. So you could say to us, we want to see a report in March 2022 of what you're proposing as a tariff, and then you're really talking from that point on, what is the statutory consultation period? The first part of that is yes for us to determine, because we've then got to set a date for it, you know, when the tariff would come in and how you do the consultation. So you're probably allowing, from the date of the committee, I think through to it coming into effect, probably 4 months, because you would have a decision agreement. We would then have to arrange to get that into a public notice. You would then have to allow enough of a consultation period for comment, and then bring it back and say, from your original implementation date, it's 2 months. So you're probably talking about 4 months. You're probably talking about July 2023.
So could we shortcut this a little bit by setting the tariff today and then informing the trade that we're going to have another, or check the tariff, but review the tariff ASAP? You know, with whatever time scale there is between July the 6th and whenever. Just to review it. If need be, we can reduce it or put it up. But we don't know what's going to happen in, say, 6 months' time, fuel-wise, etc.
I think, Chair, if I can just chip in here a little bit. Obviously, there's already been a resolution that it will be reviewed in 1 year. So if you're kind of proposing something different to that, I'm not sure on what basis that's already been resolved, so that is there. It's going to be reviewed in 1 year. What are you wanting to do different to that?
We're surely, you know, not knowing what the future is going to bring financially. When we did say that, we didn't know things were going to jump from what it did when we set it to what it is now. It's really leapt up. Cost of living, fuel, everything. So can we not make another proposal that it is reviewed ASAP, which would take quite a while to get through the system to get it actually done, you know, maybe, I don't know, 6 months, 8 months. And things may not have changed. And it'd be up to us then if we do leave it as it is, as at the new tariff we do set, whatever that may be, or raise it if need be. Would that not be possible?
I think that's probably a question for Phil, really, but I think he's already mentioned the fact that probably you can't have a rolling review with no end point in sight sort of thing, but that's a question for Phil.
Even because of these unmitigating circumstances we're going through, you know, we don't always have wars in the west and the east, which we go around the world. Those wars, you know, cost of living hasn't gone up like this since I don't know when, the 70s maybe. So this is we're in strange times, and I'm trying to be devil's advocate and try and keep everyone happy.
I think it was Councillor Sesford said this. If it wasn't, I apologise. I think there is an argument to say that we should avoid sort of changing our position on too frequent a basis. There's merit in saying this is the position of the County Council and this is what we will do. What I would say is what you have is a resolution from the meeting in March which says the Council will review this in 12 months. There is actually nothing to stop the trade, and again there is a question about, well, what do I mean by the trade, because there isn't a representative body, but if there was, I think, such a groundswell from the trade, you know, in 3 months, 5 months, 6 months' time, that because there were further changes that the Council should then look at this again, we would have to bring that to you, and you'd have to consider that. So there's an argument to say, well, you've got, as Melanie says, you've got a resolution which says you'll revisit it in 12 months. I agree with what Councillor Sesford is saying. I think we need to set our position, but there is nothing to say that you couldn't do it earlier if there was significant reason to do it. But I would suggest that has to come from the trade rather than the council, but that's just our view. But legally speaking, there is nothing which says you must do this every 12 months, 24 months, or otherwise. It is just there. When you do it, that is the process. And thereafter, it's, you know, a matter for councillors to decide how they wish to do it and when they wish to do it.
At least we've got a backstop, or they've got a backstop, basically.
I think arguably they do. I think it's like any matter that the council deals with or sets policy on. If that policy was significantly challenged or questioned or otherwise, you would at least want to consider whether or not you want to have regard to that issue.
Right, thanks. You forgot your name again. Foster, Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. Two-part question, if I can ask the first part first, which you would do normally anyway. For instance, 10 pence for the for the subsequent 86-yard increments. That 10 pence, is it charged after each 86, or is it as you go into the 86 yards? Do you know what I mean? So as soon as you click over on the 87th yard, there's another 10 pence started, or is it after each completed 86 yards?
So if you go to page 1, yeah, it's going to say, it'll say part thereof. So basically, if you look at our page 1, and it says 250, £2.50 for 500 yards. So you get into your taxi, and assuming they are charging the maximum, it will say £2.50. When you have driven 500 yards, it will then click over to the 501th yard. It'll start to go into the 10 pence for 91 yards. So when you get to 591 yards, and you then go to 592, it will click another 10 pence.
Thank you, Chair. So that brings me on to the next part, because what I'm thinking is actually going to be the case. You mentioned earlier about we could double the yardage and then obviously double the price. So instead of 10 pence for 86, you can have 20 pence for 172. If we did that, one, it doesn't look as if the meter's just constantly going up, because I had to Google it, mind, but 86 yards is 0.0489 miles. So you blink and you've travelled that. So that's going to seem quite extortionate to the customer and off-putting. But if it takes longer to click up, it's just that little bit more reassuring for the customer. But I'm thinking the other side of the coin for the taxi driver is if you're doing it double and they've just gotten that 1 or 2 yards in, they're just making that little bit extra on the tariff. And I think it's at a time where whatever we do, every little bit helps. So I'm just wondering if maybe it's a good idea to go down that route and double the yardage and double the price to go with it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Phil?
So one of the actual representations on the front page, so BTA, Borough Taxi Association, let's get this right. There was a representation of the Borough Taxi Association, but there was a subsequent one, which is the additional one. So that's where they have suggested that you went to 176 yards, so you basically doubled it and then went to a 20 pence unit. So that suggestion has been made, and in practical terms, you are right. So again, if you are, it's difficult to know, but if you're sort of doing longer journeys, you may benefit more from that because you're doing more yardage, more mileage. If you're doing shorter journeys, you will potentially benefit less because you're right, your journey may come to an end before it gets to the next unit that it clicks over. But I think it's one of those things, as I say, whereby no matter how much you debate this or do this, there is probably going to be some that will look at this and go, that works for me, but that bit doesn't work for me. That's always going to be a challenge, and I think it's always going to come down to that rural use of taxis vis-a-vis urban. But I think that's why what we have seen, as I say, is more people saying we want a flag increase because that benefits everybody. The debate probably then is more about, well, how much does it increase over that yardage distance? So you're right, some people will think, well, if it had been left as 80 odd yards, I would have now got another 10 pence because I would have been halfway through my journey and it would have clicked over. Some people look and think, well, it's a longer journey, it's 176 yards, it's a tenth of a mile. It doesn't make much difference. I can't give you...
Chair, can I come back on that? I'm a bit confused there, because to me, if, say for instance, they've got up to the 86 yards that's ready to click over at the next 10 pence, but they stop there, then the taxi driver's only getting that 10 pence. But if you do it so it's 172 yards, it would have put 20 pence on, but if they still only do that 86 yards, it's 20 pence. So to me, what you're saying doesn't work. I think it's actually going to be beneficial regardless, because it means they've got that much further they can go, in that, well, say further, it's still a small amount, before that 20 pence kind of, before they go in that next 10 pence, because they're still in the 20 pence. So there's got to be that little bit of something. I mean, I know we're talking a tiny amount of money on that, but every little bit helps. If you're doing lots of taxi journeys with lots of different people, it's what that cumulative effect. But that is still separate from whatever we decide to do for the flagfall. I'm not saying leave the flagfall and just do this. This would be a separate thing on itself, and then we'll look at the flagfall. And I just think it would actually be just that, even that tiny bit beneficial, but it's also nicer for the customer, not seeing that meter go up and up quite so fast. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Councillor Wallace?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Chair, I don't know if it'll help or not, but I make it very clear, I don't make no declaration of interest because I haven't driven a taxi for years, but I did drive taxis for many, many years. And I never looked at the flag turning. I never looked at the meter turning. And my passengers in the car are too busy talking to each other to look at the meter turning. I mean, no disrespect to the question Julie's been raising there. The reality is, you want to know how much it costs from A to B. How much am I paying when I get out the car? And if I suggest, for example, you look at Rep 2 on page 2. Your tariff 1 would increase by 60 pence on the flagfall, which means as soon as you pull away, it's costing that passenger 60 pence more than what they were paying the day before. If he went 10 mile, the taxi driver would be over the moon because it was a good run. And he'd be making £1.60 more. Doesn't matter how many yards he's done, it's not a fortune, £1.60. He's got to do 10 mile back unpaid. So if he does 10 miles, he's probably got the average amount for a diesel car using a gallon of fuel. That means he's made £3.20 extra to what he got the day before the increase. Can I suggest to colleagues, £3.20 or a gallon of fuel going in that driver's pocket isn't excessive, because it's probably just covered the increase in fuel over the last 3 months. However, it's making him meet the increase in the cost of living. The passenger in the car expects the owner and the driver to meet the current increase in cost of living. If they don't, they'll not be in a car because that car will be parked up off the road. So we have to meet what the customer's expectations are and what the driver's expectations are. And if the Tasman has looked at these, and I'm using many years of experience to keep both parties happy, I'm very close, if you want a recommendation, to recommend Rep 2. For the reasons I've outlined, Chair, but I don't know if you want that recommendation yet, so I'm not making it yet. I'm just saying I'm mindful.
Right, thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
I understand where you're coming from. My worry is that we've got to put it up somehow, I'd say. We've got to. But I don't want to outprice things, because at the end of the day, the public are going to be the ones who will decide whether or not that is a fair rise. I agree with you. They've got to get the money back. They've got to be paid a living wage sort of thing. And it's going to be very tricky. We've got the urban and the rural as well, which is also awkward. But I don't want to outprice it. So I'm open. Well, we all are open-minded at the moment. So has anyone else got any comments to make about this? We've got two. We'll go for Councillor Lee, please, first.
Just with the taxis, I can't remember a time when I actually got into a purely diesel taxi. Most of the taxis I've been in recently are hybrid or electric. So it seems that this whole argument, just because fuel's gone up, we should, you know, push the price of the taxis up, doesn't seem to bear much support for net zero. A lot of taxi operators have branched out into electric. I don't know if we've got any figures on it, but it just seems if we've agreed to rise and only 8 out of 1,000 objected, I think we should just stick with that.
A very valid point. Thank you. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. I think going on that, yes, the amount of taxi drivers I've seen at charging points, and I know that has been a bone of contention in the past from people, which I think is one of the reasons why NCC actually introduced the charge at our charging points, which used to be free. So there definitely is a take-up with the taxis, with electric, but there are still a lot of internal combustion engine taxis out there as well. But I did a quick calculation earlier on, looked at what the representations were suggesting and did a rough average. It's by no means accurate, but a rough average. And then what we had proposed and tried to meet them in the middle. So I'm just going to put some figures out there. It's not a proposal as such, just something for us to maybe look at and work with as a starter. But for Tariff 1, perhaps starting at £2.80, Tariff 2, £3.30, Tariff 3, £5.30 to £5.40, Tariff 4, £3.10, Tariff 5, £3.65, and Tariff 6, £5.35. So I've kind of tried to sort of meet the representations halfway between what we suggested and what they're suggesting, an average of what they're suggesting, just maybe as starting place to look at, Chair. Thank you.
Chair, sorry, can that just be repeated a bit more slowly, because I think we've all probably struggled to write that down.
Sorry, yeah. What I'd suggested for Tariff 1 would be a proposal of £2.80, Tariff 2, £3.30, Tariff 3, I'd say about £5.35, Tariff 4, £3.10, Tariff 5, £3.65, and Tariff 6, £5.35. Like I said, these aren't something I'm saying should be set in stone and we should go with these. I just think it's a place to start for us to think about whether we want to just go that halfway or go more towards the representations or more towards what we said last time. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, what was Tariff 3?
Tariff 3, it was about £5.35.
So I think you said 540 the first time.
I said between 5.30 to 5.40, so I just decided really that is £5.35, so thank you, Chair.
Yeah, Phil? Oh.
So, I was going to say that. So again, just to avoid any confusion, if we just use Tariff 1 as by example. So what you've got on the front page is, and I think what's being proposed at Councillor Foster is that for the first 500 yards of the journey, so what you're seeing then basically is an increase in, the net increase is basically on the flag, that's what it is. So you're talking about 30 pence, etc., etc. As my learned colleague just leant over to me, I think, yes, I'm not making a view on this, but I think, going back to what I said before, there has to be a decision whether it's 5.35 or 5.40 or somewhere in between. It works far better in terms of just trying to keep it as whole units. But as I say, just to clarify, that's what you're proposing. So if you look at our current Tariff 1, what we had proposed was an increase in the flag fall basically of 20 pence. Because it went from £2, no it didn't, that was my maths, yeah, it's 10 pence. It went from £2.50 to £2.60. What you're suggesting is £2.80. Is somewhere in the middle of between what was proposed by the council and what's come in. If I go back to the point, I think it was Councillor...
Can I just clarify, though, you've just said that's what you're proposing. I did make it clear that it's not a proposal, it's just to put something out there as a starting point, but it's not an actual proposal at this point in time.
It's a suggestion.
And can I make it clear, I'm not recommending it's a matter for yourselves to debate. I just want to go back to the point, excuse me, that Councillor Wallace was making before as well. So if you turn the page and you've got that initial line where it shows Tariff 1, current, etc. What I think you said, Councillor Wallace, was that if you looked at Tariff 2, that would be a 60p increase because that goes from £3.90 to £4.50. So again, that's just to clarify what that would be. That's on the measured mile. Because as I say, your £3.90 there is your 500 yards plus the additional mileage to make it up to the mile. So that's a 60p increase. That's just to clarify that.
Yeah. Chair, can I ask a question before you do any more workings out?
Yeah.
Does anybody know, because with all these figures, there's not a 5p. Can you work out, can anybody tell me, can you get a 5p on a metre in a taxi?
I have no idea, but this is why Tasman is suggesting it's got to be in 10p increments.
The answer is you can't. That's why it's on notes, okay?
I think we can. Yeah, I think you can. I would actually probably differ, because I think you can with the newer meters, but in reality, I think all of even the district councils before Unitary Authority in 2009 would already move to that 10p unit, and it came down to the fact that, as I say, it was about, you know, when I think people used money and actually paid for things with cash, whereas a lot of it's done by credit card now. It was very much about actually not ending up with a fare of £5.23 or something like that. And it went to whole units, and most people then sought to increase tariff by reducing yardage and keeping it a fixed unit.
Thanks. Councillor Seymour?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm just not sure, really. You know, changing all these numbers, what would that actually mean in percentage? Because we resolved to increase all 6 tariffs with an increase of 5%. So we're changing these numbers, then it would be 6 or 7 or 8, or, I mean, obviously, you know, we don't have, you know, different numbers in front of us with different percentages, if you like, because this is 5%. Is that correct?
But it was 5%. We agreed on 5%, but I wouldn't imagine it'll matter about any percentage, really, as long as we agree on what we raise them by. Tasman?
Sorry, yes, the original agreement was a 5%, but as Councillor Sesfa says, it's quite hard to get 10p's into 5. So it's sometimes easier to do it in the actual monetary terms, which is why you've got it in those, so that the tariff we set today, when you leave the room, is the tariff that will actually be in place, and we don't have to go out and work it out again. Does that solve you? Do you want us? I was going to say it will need me to get a calculator if you want us to work the percentages out for that. My maths is not that good today.
Any more?
We can.
I don't know if I can just, sorry, chip in again. It doesn't have to be quantified as a percentage. I think that's the answer. It's the figures or the important things. It doesn't have to be X percent. You don't have to say that it's been increased by X percent. It's the actual figures that count.
Phil?
Yeah. It's probably just to add more to what's just been said, but yeah, it is about, so if you went to the back page, it is simply about agreeing, you know, you might decide there was one of those columns that you like, and you think that is a reasonable increase based upon monetary terms, and that's really all. I know that's a very simplification, that's all you need to do, but that's what it's about. It's about saying, what are we charging now and what do you want to charge? So percentages are, yes, how we've expressed in the past, just to try and get a handle on it, but it's what you want to be. So if you looked at our current tariff 1 and current, and I'm just doing this for ease, and I stress for ease, I'm just going to the opposite end of the table just so everybody knows we're looking at the left-hand column and the right-hand column. You know, if you said, well, tariff 1, £3.90. What happens if we did tariff 2? You would basically see a 50p increase. If you did 2 miles, you would see an 80p increase. You know, so there may be something there which you actually think is appropriate for what you want to achieve in terms of being the right level of increase, but absolutely it does not have to be a percentage. It's about the monthly term.
Thank you. Councillor Gallagher.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's more a comment than anything else. It shows that, you know, we're trying to take everybody's feelings here, and there's a good bit of scrutiny. We're trying to support the taxi trade as well as support residents of Northumberland. But my mindset is that the fuel costs are going up and they're going through the roof. I think Councillor Lee highlighted it, that, you know, that a lot of them are electric or hybrid. So the reality is the support for the taxi businesses, not everybody's jumping into a big diesel car. And there's a drive from this council for climate change. So the support this way would be more beneficial in the policies of Northumberland County Council. So it was just basically to say that, you know, we're trying to do the right thing, which is in very, very difficult times. So a good bit of scrutiny from the Chair. Thank you very much.
Couldn't agree more. Any more comments? Well, somehow we're going to have to work out. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just one in response to that. That's a very valid point, which, to be honest, I hadn't considered. And I thank Councillor Lee for raising it. I have to say, in my ward, I don't know any electric vehicles. Now, it might be unique. My point I'm trying to make is that 67 wards, there's nobody sitting in this room can say how many there is in the 67 wards. And in fact, in March, I asked the question how many electric vehicles there were licensed, and we didn't have the exact number. What we are aware of is a couple of big companies who do and are going that way. But we passed at the last meeting what the regulations would be. And the regulations weren't that every vehicle had to be electric. That wasn't a regulation at all. We were mindful that cars will also be petrol and diesel driven. And I'm looking at the recommendations for new licences and existing licences, taking us right up to 2029. So I think we have to be mindful that there will be a mix of vehicles on the road, Chair. My final point's dead simple. And a petrol diesel driven car is still a lot cheaper than the electric car as well. And the availability of filling up is a lot easier for vehicles than it is to get charged up. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I agree totally. Yeah. Right. Do you want to say this? I thought you had your hand up. Sorry. We are where we are. We've got to make a decision sometime today, hopefully. So have we got any proposals at all of what we think or feel we should be going with? Phil's going to have a word.
Sorry. I think, Chair, in terms of the report, again, if we go back to page 13, I think, is it? 13. The committee has to approach it in terms of probably recommendation 1, first of all. I know there's been significant discussion and debate, but you have to then, I think, it's probably prudent, and I'm looking at Melanie here, it's probably prudent to consider the first recommendation, because if that were passed, you don't then need to then go into a further recommendation of what the tariff would actually be. And obviously, if that falls, then you move into the second part of what the modification would be.
So, for the first?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, that seems a sensible way to approach it. So, would still need. So the proposal A to implement the table of fares would still need to be proposed and seconded by somebody, though.
So is there a proposal to implement the first bullet point, implement the table of fares as proposed without modification? That's the 5%. Proposed by Councillor Lee, seconded by Councillor Sesford. I don't think there's any need to debate that, really. We've more or less debated the debate. Could we put that to the vote, that we leave the the 5% implementation? Please show hands.
Is that in favour of the proposal?
In favour of the proposal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 4, 6. Against? 1, 2. Abstentions? 1. Right. Well, we've done that one. Now we go to the third bullet.
Can I just say, you do also need to set a date upon which the agreed fares shall come into effect?
What is... Can I have a proposal for the third bullet point to set a date upon the time to agree the fares should come into effect, which has to be before the 6th of July anyway. Memory loss. Councillor Foster.
Chair, I'm happy to stand and being corrected here, but generally accounting tends to go Monday to Sunday. So for ease, for that changeover of tariff, I would propose that it takes effect from Monday, the 4th of July. I think it's the 4th, the Monday, but definitely the Monday. And then I think it's just going to be easier for accounts purposes for the taxi drivers and the companies. Thank you, Chair.
Apparently a Monday is the 4th of July.
I've just looked.
So we need that seconded.
Yeah. Councillor Sesford, seconded that. No more proposals. Can I have a show of hands for that, please? Which sounds very sensible.
It's unanimous.
That's carried unanimously. Well, I thought this would be a long meeting. We've only managed an hour and a quarter. Lost my paperwork now. Nope. There being no more business. Sorry, is there? I'm looking for it.
Page 25. Page 25,
No.
Chair.
Let's get right to this.
Safeguarding. 25.
25. It's going to be a longer meeting, sorry. Right. Safeguarding and road safety. I presume Phil's going to present this?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it's quite a straightforward report. Basically, what government have done have brought forward legislation which is intended to safeguard those people who travel in licensed active carriage and private hire vehicles, and it basically puts a requirement on both licensing authorities who witness potential issues to share that with the licensing authority for the vehicle or the driver concerned, and it equally requires the licensing authority that's been notified to respond to and take appropriate action. So it is purely and simply there for information, but it is fundamental to the work of licensing in terms of safeguarding those who travel in taxis.
Thank you, Phil. The reason I missed this was because it is just to be noted, basically. My apologies, I forgot that. Right, we'll finish that. Thank you for attending.
License.
What? Oh, no. Sorry, date and time of next meeting. 24th of August. There's no other urgent business, so this meeting now concludes. Thank you for attending.